Here in Focus Controls, we have lots to talk about, that is for sure. We'll talk about some things that have been in cameras for quite some time, like your focus mode and your bracketed focus area, but we have a lot of new controls. We have a fantastic subject tracking, as well as a number of other tools that you can use to make sure that your images are properly focused. First and foremost, the autofocus main control, whether it's in manual focus or autofocus, is usually on the side of the lens. This is your master control for going from manual focus to autofocus. But some lenses do not have an AF/MF switch. They have a focus control switch, or they might even be manual focus. In some of those cases where they have a focus control switch, there will be a focus mode option in the AF menu number 1 for turning the camera from autofocus to manual focus. And so most of the features we're going to be talking about in this section are autofocus. And so you probably want to make sure that your camera is in autofocus to work with these different features. So the AF mode or AF operation button is on the top left of the camera, and it's got a little AF there. There are some other primary controls. I just want to give you a bit of a preview here. There is your AF point selection button, which will be used for choosing the size of area that you're going to focus on. In the front of the camera, the multifunction button, this was used for ISO back in the exposure, but as we saw, it can be used for a multitude of things, and so we can change the focus area by pressing this button after we press the AF point selection button. I'll show you more about that in a moment. For moving our focusing point around, we have our little joystick on the back of the camera, so we can go up, down, and left and right with it. We have a smart controller, and this is a fairly new feature on many Canon cameras, and it senses your finger movement and how fast and how far it moves. So it is a secondary way of moving the focus point away, but it's also a button used for starting or initiating autofocus. On the front of the camera, the MFN2 button, multifunction 2 button, is a reprogrammable button, but right now, at least default out of the box, it is for starting and stopping tracking, and I'm going to show you how that works in this section as well. All right, the first and most important setting on setting up your autofocus is getting the mode set correctly. And this is done with the AF button on the top of the camera. Canon calls this the AF operation of the camera, and there are just two choices. It's one shot and servo. Now you can also adjust this setting with the multifunction button on the top of the camera, and there are 5 different settings in there. The focus mode, the middle of that, can choose between those same options in there, and you use the same controls that you use for multifunction control as we've talked about before. Now, if that's not enough, you can also dive into the menu and you can control it in the AF menu. You can go into the AF operation and turn it between one shot and servo. So 3 different ways of achieving the same goal. What happens if you go to one and change it and then go to the other? It just keeps whatever your last setting in there. Now, what does this do? Well, one shot is for stationary subjects. You focus on the subject, and it allows you to focus on a subject and then recompose as you see fit. Servo deals with subjects that are moving towards the camera. Now, you want to keep in mind that there is a difference between servo and tracking. We'll talk about tracking here in a moment. Servo is for subjects moving towards or away from the camera. So that's most moving subjects, is you want to have it there. Now you can also turn off the focusing system into manual focus, and that might be good for static scenes like landscape photography or architectural photography where you want to manually adjust the lens yourself. But with one shot and servo, that's going to be your first main setting on the camera. Myself, as soon as I go into a sports action type scenario, taking and putting the camera and putting it into the servo mode is generally the first thing that I do. Let's take a quick look at these operations. I know most of you are familiar with this, but let's just make sure everybody is. So to make this change, I'm going to press the AF button on the top of the camera, and I'm going to use the main dial to change back and forth between one shot and servo. So in the one shot mode, you can see I have a kind of medium-sized box selected here. I can focus on my subject, and wherever I point this and press the button, it will focus on that particular subject. Well, if I want to put that subject as my primary subject, but I want to hold it, I can do something called focus hold, where I focus on this first target, I press down, it locks the focus, and then I can hold it while I move the camera off to the side, press the shutter release, and that subject is in focus even though it is way off to the side. I can do it in reverse, where I focus, recompose, and it is locked on the original subject there. Now if we go into the servo mode, this is where it constantly adjusts between the different areas. And how quickly it adjusts, well, that's going to be something we talk about in the focus menu. But as something moves towards us, eventually it'll go out of range here. There we go. And it'll track that subject as it's coming towards us and away from us. That's what the servo focusing does. And so anytime you're focusing on sports action, generally speaking, you're going to want to be in the servo mode. All right, next up is the focusing area. Where do we want our camera to focus? Now this is going to be initiated with the AF point selection button. This activates the particular feature, and then there are going to be 8 options that we can kind of cycle through and choose. And the way that we choose those is by pressing the multifunction button. We press it repeatedly just to go from left to right and then back through the whole cycle again. And so that allows us to change the particular area. Now we have a couple of little joysticks, you might say, that we can work with here. The multi-controller is a nice 8-way directional controller which allows us to move the focusing point up, down, and left and right. We can also use the smart controller to control where our focusing point is, and I'm going to show you more about that in a moment. Let's concentrate on these 8 different areas that we can choose from for right now. First up is Spot AF. I find this modestly useful in some cases where you want to be very, very exacting by manually putting a very small focusing point on a subject. If you want to get it on someone's eyeball and not their eyelash, this would be the tool that you want to use for that. All right, a general good purpose 1-point AF when you want to focus on a particular area that's not too small. If you choose too small of area, sometimes there's not enough contrast in that area and it's difficult to focus. So this is going to work a little bit better in most situations and is good for the general finicky photographer who wants to place the focus point right where they want it. The next 2 I don't find quite as useful. They're a little bit more legacy options from previous days of different cameras. What it does is it chooses one primary point in the middle, but then if it can't find anything, it looks for additional information in the side or above and below areas. And so this might be for subjects that are moving around a little bit or who don't have as good of contrast to focusing on. Expand AF is kind of the same thing with just more focusing points around the edges so that if the subject moves, it can be picked up. Now, the new focusing area that I am excited about and the one that I really like is 1, 2, and 3. They're kind of all the same, but you'll see the difference. The idea here is that you get a box that is customizable. You get to choose the size of this box in here. So if you want it wider, you want it bigger, you want it taller, you can make it whatever size you want. Now, I have long preached that in action photography, you want to have a box about the size of your subject. And this really allows you to customize the size of the box to whatever size your subject is, depending on where you're standing and what lens you're using. And so this is something that can be customized. It starts off as a square box, but you can make it anything you want. Now the second and third box, well, it's customizable as well, but one starts off as vertical and one starts off as horizontal. Now something about these is that these tend to prioritize faces. The camera is using its own computer on trying to figure out when it wants to choose a face versus the closest subject. It may or may not be exactly what you want, but realize that it's kind of defaulting to trying to choose faces when it can identify them. And then finally, we have a whole area AF. If you're not sure what to focus on and you want to look at the entire scene, generally speaking, it's going to focus on what's closest to you, but it will also prioritize faces. And so if a face is in the background, it might choose that over something that is close to you. And so if you were going to hand the camera to somebody who has no idea what they're doing and you said, just take some basic photos, the whole area AF would probably be the simplest mode for them to be in. I think most serious photographers on this camera are going to use probably a combination of the 1-point AF and then the flexible AF options on there. I think those are going to give you the greatest versatility of something that's fairly small and something that is adjustable in size. Now, talking about the focusing area that we're using, we have just about 100% coverage. It covers virtually every pixel on the frame. Not technically every pixel, but pretty close to it, enough where we can say, I think we've got the whole area covered. Now there is 1,053 focusing points. It's an area of 39 clicks by 27 clicks across and up and down, and I think we've reached the limit of how many focusing points we might need. I'm sure cameras in the future will have more selectable, finer focusing points, but it's not really necessary. You can focus pretty much anywhere you want within the frame. Now, Canon has a fantastic autofocus system, and a lot of it is due thanks to their technology called dual pixel CMOS AF. And what it does is it takes pixels and it kind of breaks them up into half. So it understands what's happening on the left half versus the right half of the pixel, and it can more quickly focus the lens to where it needs to be in focus. And thanks to the stuff, it's very, very fast focusing and does an extremely good job. Now the camera can focus down extremely low, albeit with certain lenses it might not be as good as with other lenses. And I've always been dubious of this rating anyway, because it really depends on the contrast that you're working with. With pure fantastic contrast of white and black, it might be very easy to pick up on, but if you're focusing on some more subtle gradations, it may not pick up on it quite as easily. In general, though, it is one of the best cameras ever in existence in low light focusing. All right, so that is our focusing areas and some information about how the camera is going to focus. Now, there are a lot of different controls. So first up, when you press the AF point selection button in the back, you press the multifunction button to kind of scroll through the different options. I have found that that's not always the easiest way to get to things, and I will show you the problem and the solution. All right, let's take a look at our focusing points, and I'm going to make this a little bit darker so we can concentrate on what is important here. All right, so if we press the AF point selection button right here on the back of the camera, we have our options down here along the bottom. If we want to change them, we press the multifunction button on the front of the camera. And what happens if we get to area number 2 and we want to go to area number 1? Well, we don't dial over. That moves the focusing point around, as you can see here. We have to press 8 different times because these dials are dedicated to moving the focusing point. And you can see that moves up and down so that you can always see where the focusing point is going to go. Now, a feature that I think some of you might like is if we dive into the autofocus menu, and on page 4 here, AF area selection control. Rather than the multifunction button, you can have it be the dial. All right, so now when you press this button, you can dial right or you can dial left. And so you can very easily get to things in that manner. Now this still controls the up and down. This no longer controls moving the focusing point left and right, but chooses the option left and right. And I think that's just very easy because I don't want to have to scroll around every time I want to move it one different area. So I think some of you might like that particular change. All right, next up, let's talk about tracking. Before I get into this, let's remember the difference. The servo was following subjects that came towards you and away from you and was adjusting focus. Tracking is going to follow subjects left and right in the frame, and this camera currently can choose between 3 different styles of subjects: people, animals, and vehicles. 3 pretty common subjects for photographers. Now, the way that you can turn this on is by going into the AF menu and turning on subject tracking. And so I have found that the camera is extremely good at picking up these subjects and following them. Now, the type of bracket that you're going to get around your subject really depends on if it's identifying it, if it's tracking it, if you're locked in and focusing. And so realize there's a lot of different colors and different types of brackets to track the different types of subjects that you have there. So this is simply turning on tracking and turning it off. Now, choosing which type of subject you want to track can be done in subject to detect. And so here is where you can choose people, animals, and vehicles. Let's go ahead and dive in and adjust a few of these and take a look at what's going on. So let's brighten up our image here so we can see what's going on. Let's dive into our menu. We're going to go over to our first page here, and we're going to turn our subject tracking on, and let's set this to people. And so right now, I'm going to change this area to the whole area. So it's looking at everything in the frame, and you can see it immediately picks up on the person. Now there's left and right arrows, and if I go right, it changes the eye that it's looking at. Let's go in and change it to animals and see if it picks up. Well, it looks like it's still picking up the person. Did I actually get that changed? I did. And it should be picking up there it did. And so now it's locked in. Well, I guess, technically humans are animals, that is the case. And so which one it picks up on, let's see, we can switch eyes back and forth. It's going to depend a little bit on how well it recognizes it. Remember, this is software that's working to try to pick these things up. Now, if I don't have a picture of a car there, but we can just go to none, and we'll see what happens here. We don't have anything particular that it's picking up on, and so it's not really trying to track anything. It's looking at everything. Let's take a subject here in the foreground here. See if it picks this up. See, it's not picking up the face at all. It's just picking up that there's a subject there that it's tracking around. Let's change this to people. It recognizes the face, and we've got it locked in there as it moves around. And so it's pretty tenacious, I should say, on its tracking. It really keeps you locked in quite well. Now, there's something particularly interesting about the vehicle selection option in here. First off, yes, it will track the vehicles and it can lock onto them, and it will show you different colored frames, whether you're in the one shot or the servo mode with them. But what it has is it's called spot detection. And really what it is helmet detection. And so the idea is with motorcyclists or open cockpit vehicles like F1 racing cars where you can see the driver's helmet, it'll actually focus on the helmet, not the front of the vehicle or someplace else on the vehicle. Now, I haven't shot a lot of open cockpit car racing, but I did have other photos that I pulled from where there is a vehicle, but there's also visible people. And at least photographing the image that I have on my monitor, it did a very good job at selecting the heads of the people on the vehicle. And so if you want to have a little bit more accurate focusing, well, that's the area that we really want most in focus, is we want to be able to see the driver. And so if you are doing that type of photography, you can apply it to what you're doing. I would encourage you turning on the spot detection for that particular type of subject. Now, on the front of the camera, there's a number of controls that are customizable, but from the factory, the multifunction 2 button, the upper of the 2 buttons, is for starting and stopping of tracking. All right, so if you have a subject, it's going to look in the area you've selected for what it wants to focus on. And this has eye detection focus, so it might choose one eye over the other eye. You might be able to move them back and forth. If you move the focusing frame a little bit, it might move to a different eye to focus on. Now, you move it over to a different face, it's going to move to a different set of eyes. And if you said, you know what, that is the eye that I want to track right there, you would press in on this button, and it would change in its style. It would have a double bracket around it, and that means that's the one that the camera is locking into. Now, it's not actually focusing on the subject or on that eye, it's just tracking it. It knows exactly where that eye is, so that when you do press whatever button you have attributed to autofocus, the shutter release button or the AF on button on the back of the camera, it will then focus on that particular subject. All right, so let's give this a try. We've got a bunch of different eyes to focus on, and let's get this set up in the camera here. We're going to move things around just a bit. All right, so the area that we're going to choose just kind of a box here in the middle. Subject tracking is on. We're going to choose people, and we're going to choose eye detection right now. And get my focusing set here to the middle. So you can see that on this particular subject, it's picking one eye or the other eye. Kind of depends on whatever's closest to the middle of the frame. Now there's another person back here, and if I just give it a focus so it can identify that a little bit more clearly, it kind of does the same thing. And I don't think it can see the eyes right now because they're so out of focus. And so I just kind of quickly focus on it by pressing down on the shutter release. Now let's say we want to focus on this right eye from our perspective. It's his left eye. I'm going to go around to the front of the camera, and I'm going to press this top button in here. Now I could also do this button. It's the concave button, not the convex button. And if I lock that in, let's get it on the correct eye, right there, you can see it change. And now it tracks that no matter where it goes. And when I press down on the shutter release, it's going to focus on that eye. And it's got that one focused on. Now, if I want to take that locking off, I'm going to press in on that front button. Oops, pressed on the wrong one, the concave button. And now we're back to the camera choosing which eye it wants to focus on. And I want her right eye, our left one, for us to see. And now I've got it locked in. And so that is by pressing the tracking start stop button on the front of the camera. And so this is something that can be attributed to other buttons on the camera if you want, but it allows you to figure out what you want to have in focus and then kind of get it composed and set it up exactly as you want to. Very effective. All right. Now, if you've been keeping track, I maybe haven't told you everything, but there are 5 different ways of changing your focus area on this camera. We've got the 8-way multi-controller. That's been on a lot of Canon cameras for a long time. We've got the new smart controller, and I'm going to show you more about that in the next slide. We saw how you can move it with the dials when you press the selection button. You can also use the touch screen on the back of the camera. We'll talk more about that as well. You can also use eye control, and we're going to talk more about that as well. And so the camera will focus where you are looking at. So let's look at some of these ways of changing a little bit more closely. All right, this new smart controller is kind of a 2-for-1 deal. It is a button which will activate focusing, or you could have it do something completely different if you want, but a lot of people like it as the focusing button. And in the middle of it, it's got a sensitive area that reads when your finger is moving over it. And it can tell which direction your finger is moving and how fast and how far it's moving. And you can move your focusing point around with this, which is kind of handy. So let me show you a little bit on how this works, because it's a little unusual in the sense that if I want to move the focusing point around, and let's darken this so you can see our focusing point, and I'm going to change our focusing point to just a single point. I'll put it in the middle. You might notice that when I want it in the middle, I press the joystick in the middle, and it shows it with a little point there. That means it's in the middle. Now, if I move my finger, let's get this reset here. I move my finger across the AF on button, it does not move. And that's just because it only moves when this is activated along the bottom. The selection process is activated. And I can move it all around the frame like this. And it moves pretty quickly, a little quickly for my liking. And so if you want to be very precise, you can use this little joystick. This might be, I want to get it in the upper left, and then this is where I exactly want it to be. So that may work out well for you. Let's get this back to the middle. Now, if you want to adjust the sensitivity of it, you go into this smart controller feature in custom function number 5, smart controller. And if you hit the Q button, that goes to the sensitivity, and you can adjust how sensitive it is to you moving your finger across that little window there that it's reading you. And so I think that's a feature that you may want to adjust and see how you like it set for your particular movements. Now, next up, this is a customizable button, and you can choose the way it works. Now, my first initial thought is it's kind of disappointing that this feature is naturally turned off. You can turn it on more of the time if you want. Let me show you. Okay, as we mentioned before, this is turned off unless you're in the active process of selecting a different mode, and then you can move it around. But if you're out of there, it doesn't work. So if we dive into custom menu number 4, and we're going to go to customize buttons. We're going to go into this mode a lot more later on, but this is the smart controller, and it is currently turned off, which means that little window doesn't normally work unless you're in that special mode. We can turn it on in 2 different ways, during metering or all the time. Let's turn it on all the time. So right now, if I want to change the focusing point, I can move it anytime I want. Now I have not gone in to play around with the sensitivity of it, so it's just really quick. So if you want to be able to move it quickly and then move it slowly, you can go across the frame and then slowly move it into its position. Now, the next option in here, I'm going to go dive back in, is during metering. Okay, so let's get this set here in the middle. So if I am actively metering the scene, I can move the focusing point around. All right. Now this camera has currently set, I believe, an 8-second meter. So after 8 seconds, it's going to disappear. And now I can't move the focusing point. It is set in. If I press halfway down on the shutter release, it does activate and I can move it again. And after another 8 seconds, the meter is going to disappear. The camera is going to go into a very light sleep mode, and I will not be able to move it with this particular setting. However, I have found that this smart controller, it moves a little too quickly for me, and so it's not my favorite way of moving it around. I can always press this button and release it, and so I can move it around, and then press down on the shutter release to escape, and then always use the 8-way controller for fine-tuning it there. So there is a number of options, and what's going to work best for you is probably different than what works best for me. So as long as you know about the controls, you can make those adjustments yourself. Now, if you want to adjust the metering timer so that it is active for a shorter or longer period of time, you can go into shooting menu number 8 and control how long that 8-second timer is, 4 seconds or 15 or whatever long seconds, how many ever seconds you want to have in there. So a lot of different controls in there. All right, next up is eye control. So this is one of the headline features of this camera because nobody else has it, at least not since Canon's film days in their EOS 3. So this is where the camera, and listen to the words very carefully, will allow you to select a focusing point by where your eye is. It's not going to follow focus where your eye is, so your eye can choose a different part of the frame, and then you press a button, and that's where your camera will then choose to focus. It's not that the camera is just focusing wherever you look in the frame. That, I'm sure they've tried, and I don't think it would work out, which is why it's not an available option. So eye control for selecting your focus area. You can turn this on and turn it off. Calibration number. You can have up to 6 different calibrations. Now, this could be for 6 different peoples, or it could be for 6 scenarios, like you in sunshine and in shade and in indoors with sunglasses on or prescription glasses. It could be a variety of things where it reads your eyes a little bit differently depending on the conditions. You can go into the calibration mode, and what it does is it takes you through a little process where you stare at a dot, and you need to look directly at the dot and stare at it until it disappears, and then it goes to the next dot and the next dot. And what's happening is that there are multiple sensors sensing where your eye is looking at, and this calibrates it for the camera, and then it will know where you are focusing at when you look through the viewfinder. Now, the pointer display, the way it comes up, the way it looks, well, there's a whole bunch of different options. We're going to go through the particulars of that when we get into the eye control menu setting on this. You can choose different colors and sizes and the way it appears and when it appears. But the idea is the same. You get to choose where you want to focus at by where you look. And so you might have a bracketed area selected, okay? And if you look at one subject or another subject or a third subject, you can decide, that's where I want to focus on by pressing the focusing button, and boom, it will take you there. Next up is back button focusing. So this is a traditional favorite way of focusing with Canon and other cameras as well. The way that most cameras were designed at the beginning, including Canon, for focusing is you press halfway down on the shutter release, the camera will focus, and then you press all the way down to take a photo. Now, some people don't like doing this. They want to separate the operations of focusing and shooting the photo. And so you can do that by turning off the focusing associated with the shutter release on the camera. You can go into the custom buttons and you can turn that feature off. So let me show you why this is a problem and why some people use this as the solution. Now, before we really even get into doing this, we were recently talking about tracking, and this doesn't work so well with tracking. So we are going to turn subject tracking off so that the camera is simply going to focus on whatever focusing point we have in there. Let's get a subject here in the foreground to focus on. And if we want to focus on our subject and take a photo where they are right in the middle of the frame, then that works out perfectly well. We have our subject right there in the middle of the frame. If we want to focus on them and put them off to the side, well, we can't just move them off to the side because our focus point is in the middle and it's going to focus on things that are in the background. We can, of course, focus and recompose and take a photo. The problem is that we need to leave our finger halfway down on the shutter release until we want to take a photo. And if we release and press back down, well, then we need to go through the whole process again. And that is a little bit troublesome. So what people will do is they will go in to the menu, they will go in to custom function number 4, into customize buttons. And the first option in there is the shutter release button. And you can see that it activates metering, focusing, and also has the eye control in there if you have that turned on. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the focusing and just do the metering start. And so what happens here is the camera, I'm going to press set here. And so now the camera will start metering. The meter comes up, but it doesn't focus. It only focuses when we press this AF on button on the back of the camera. And so if we want to focus on our subject, he's in focus. We move it off to the side. We can shoot a photo. We can shoot another photo without refocusing, and we know that it is in focus, and we can shoot another photo. And so it allows you to focus where you want and shoot when you want exactly as you have it set up. And so this is a system that works really well for people that like to take manual control of their autofocusing, if you will. Allows you to really take manual control over the selection of where the focusing point is. And this has worked for years and decades for many, many photographers. It's how I was forced to switch my camera for a period of time, and it was really hard for the first several days of shooting to not press the shutter release button for focusing and to get used to pressing it on the back. But once I did, I was sold, and I've been using it for a very long period of time now. I will say, however, this may be a mode that is disappearing. With the tracking options that are working so well on subjects, this doesn't work it works fine with tracking, but it worked before tracking did. So tracking is going to add some new options that you may want to look at instead of back button focusing. So there's just a lot of options on this camera, and I'm just trying to go through what all of the individual ones do so you can make the best choice out there. So a very good choice for many photographers. All right, if you are manually focusing and you want to see the zone that your camera is focused in, manual focus peaking is a good option. This will show you highlighted areas. It kind of shimmers in this halo of color of where you are focusing and what is in focus. Now, this can be very handy in certain technical situations where you want to make sure that you're getting the focus right, and you need to be able to look at the entire screen for that. Now, in AF menu number 5 are the settings for this. You can turn it on and off. Normally, most people would leave it turned off. You can turn the intensity on high or low, and then you can choose different colors according to your background or the color of your subject. And so this, once again, is going to be useful, I think, for manual focusing operations. Maybe you've got a tilt shift lens or some older lens or some kind of unusual lens that you're manual focusing. You want to look at the whole image, and you want to see where the image is the sharpest. So it's a good option. Some people use it, some people won't. There are a number of options for manual focusing on this camera, which is nice. Another one of those manual focusing options is the Focus Assist. And this is a really great system I think they have that shows you whether you are far focused or near focused or in focused on your particular subject. It has a graph down along the bottom to show you the distance scale, and then it shows you whether you are focusing too close and which way to turn the lens. Gives you kind of some lens guidance on you need to turn the lens one direction or the other direction to get sharpest focus, and it really gives you some helpful advice if you are wanting to manual focus on a point. And so what that looks like in the real world is focus it, and when you get that little green double arrows, that means you have focused it correctly. And I have found this very easy. I like to use tilt shift lenses, and many of those are manual focus, and that's how I know I'm getting perfectly sharp focus. Another way to focus on this camera is with focus bracketing. This is where you take several photographs, and those photographs will then be compiled in post-production software, not in camera, on your computer. You take those images and combine them so that they use the sharp areas of each one to combine them into one image that has lots of area in focus that might be impossible to capture in one shot on your own. And so by going into the focus bracketing, you can turn this on and off. Normally it's turned off, obviously. You can choose the number of shots. The best number of shots is the least number of shots to get the job done, and that varies depending on a wide number of variables. The focus increment, well, that's going to depend on what the aperture and a number of other settings. This is going to be a little bit of trial and error depending on how you have your subject set up. Usually start with a focus increment in the middle, and that way you can go up or down. And what this is describing is how far apart each of the images are focused apart from one another. And it's not a set distance like a centimeter or an inch. It varies according to where the lens is focused at and what type of lens it is. And that's why you need to do a little experimentation with that regard. Now, exposure smoothing. This deals with the fact that as you change focus, the lens is usually moving in and out a little bit. And that might change the exposure a little bit because you're changing the lens, and that might change how much light is getting into the sensor. And so if you would like that smoothed out, you can do that. If not, you can disable it here. You might try it out on your particular subjects. Now, this can be very effective in macro photography or subjects that require a great depth of field. In this case, I'm focused on the front of the 4 subjects. And f8, I'm going to shoot 12 images, where the camera is going to shoot 12 images at f8, and where the last image has the last of the 4 subjects in focus. When I combine all 12 of these into one image in post-production software, currently I'm using a program called Helicon software, you get a sharp image from front to back with all the subjects sharply in focus. And so it's a very good tool for the studio photographer, possibly the architectural photographer. It does not work well in any scenario where there's lots of moving subjects. So if there's a tree moving, blowing in the wind, maybe not going to work so well there. So a few tips on working this is works best with, as I say, non-moving subjects. You want to have your camera on a tripod. Manual exposure is going to be best. Because you're trying for a lot of depth of field, usually f8 to f11 is going to be your best aperture settings for that type of photography. Now, this is the autofocus section, but it is not everything that I have to say on autofocus. We have lots more to talk about when we get to the AF menu in the camera. There's lots of subtle controls for tweaking and customizing the camera's operations to the way you like it to work. And then there is the custom menu where we get to go in and choose certain buttons to do different functions. And I'm going to show you a number of setups for focusing that allow you to change focusing modes and ways of focusing a little bit more quickly by attributing certain features to certain buttons on the camera. So lots more focusing information to come later on in this class. So I feel sorry in the sense that I can't tell everyone exactly how to set up their camera for their particular scenario. There's just too many combinations. But by going through the section, hopefully you have learned how each of the individual controls work and what they can be used for. You're going to need to do some experimenting with your own photography, how you like to shoot, the sports and action and things that you shoot, to see which ones work for you. I've found that some people love eye controlled focus and other people hate it and they don't use it or they don't need it. So there's a lot of features. Don't feel like you need to use all of them. Just kind of pick a few of them, experiment, play with them, learn them, see if they work for you, and then try another one and see if they work for you. Because with all these different options, there is bound to be a great number of options that work really well for you.